My husband has been impotent for many years. My mother-in-law made a clay figurine for me to carry on the family line. I thought following my mother-in-law's arrangements would lead to a peaceful life, but they said I was possessed by evil spirits, and the disaster star of the entire mountain village. Couples who have been unable to have children for many years have gone crazy to prepare for pregnancy. I'm the only woman in the mountains with a higher education. The old Lee family is also proud to have a wife like me. Until the 8th year of our marriage, the couple did not have a child. The village began to gossip about me, spreading rumors that I was a hen that couldn't lay eggs. No matter how good my education was, I still couldn't give birth. From then on, my husband, Lee Kong, hit and scolded me, and my mother-in-law didn't like me. She made me farm and work day and night, treating me like an animal. After a tiring day, I came home without a hot meal. I eagerly begged my mother-in-law for a hot meal, but was beaten by my husband. Everyone blamed me for the problem, thinking that I couldn't have children and deserved to have no food to eat. Long-term physical overwork made me unable to bear it, and my forehead became hot due to exposure to the sun. I think it should be heat stroke and high fever. I begged my mother-in-law to let me rest well, but she asked me to get pregnant quickly and not lose face for Lee Kong again. Aunt to you next door advised us to go into the city and take a look. At first glance, there was indeed a problem. It turned out that the one with the problem was not me, but my strong and muscular husband. In order to save her husband's face, the mother-in-law still claimed to the public that the person with health problems was me, making me suffer from the cold eyes of others. This also raised their family high and established a reputation of not abandoning even if I cannot have children. Grandma said that medicine has already been prescribed in the city, and the Lee family will soon have offspring. I was very puzzled when I saw the doctor. My mother-in-law complained that the medicine was expensive, but she didn't take anything to regulate it. Grandma scolded me mysteriously. What do you know? At night, my mother-in-law woke me up again from my sleep and pulled me out of the yard. Under the dim moonlight, my mother-in-law pulled out a yellow tooth and smiled, whispering in my ear, "Mom will find you another husband." I opened my mouth in surprise. I didn't expect my mother-in-law to encourage me to cheat. That's her own son. Mom, if Kyongzi finds out, how can I live my life? I was sold into the mountains by my original family. After leaving the modern city for so many years, I really don't know where I can go after leaving the mountains. I dare not make Lee Kong angry. My mother-in-law seemed to have noticed my concerns, gently stroking my hand with a blush on her face. Don't worry, your other husband is still Kyongzi. I'm a bit confused. How could there be two Lee Kyongs? There is an unwritten legend in the mountains. The clay craftsman at the end of the neighboring mountain village is skilled and can make anything come to life. Sincere people can even transform it into reality. There are already many men in the village who are willing to spend a lot of money to customize beautiful wives. The genius was just beginning to brighten up, and my mother-in-law and I got up early. When we left, we were laughed at by several gossips in the village. Kui-kun got up so early, didn't stay in the house with her husband for a while. Got up so early, when can she have her own child? I see these old women are upset and want to go back to this, but they are pulled back by their mother-in-law. She frowned and warned me to go up the mountain quickly, not to stay in that village at night, as wild animals often lurk in the deep mountains and old forests. When I was on my way, my mother-in-law told me that there was something more terrifying than fierce beasts. We rushed all morning and finally arrived at the mason's house when the sun was at its strongest at noon. As soon as I entered the door, my mother-in-law pulled me and knelt down to the white-haired old lady in the room, murmuring "fairy girl." The old woman's long nails lifted my chin, and she looked at the kneeling grandmother on the floor with a puzzled look. It was this girl. The fairy looked me up and down, and couldn't help but TSK. How could this small body withstand the clay figure? The fairy asked her mother-in-law. You already know how powerful this is, right? Grandma nodded and kept saying she knew. I hurriedly asked my mother-in-law about the situation, but she ignored my words and only told me that it was a bit of a financial loss, and I needed to spend more money. She wanted me to compensate her for the small silver bracelet I wore when I was abducted to the mountains. I was sweating profusely on my back, feeling that things were not as simple as I had imagined. After asking her mother-in-law for Li Qiang's birth date, the fairy began to make the clay figurine. In just 1 cup of tea, the fairy made the clay figurine. From my perspective, this clay figurine is really very similar to Li Kong. I kept in mind my mother-in-law's words that we had to leave the village before sunset, so I whispered to her that we should go back. The fairy was not angry. She just gave a yellow paper to the grandmother and urged us to leave quickly. The road on the mountain is not easy to walk, but I was very afraid of what my mother-in-law said, which was scarier than a beast. I didn't dare to stop for a second and finally rushed back to the village when the moon was high. But from a distance, I saw a group of people gathered around my doorstep. Quichen is back, and you affectionately held my hand. I didn't see you today, and I thought you couldn't have children and were driven away by Qiangzi. As soon as Aunt Yu said it, the people around who were watching the excitement started laughing and pointing at me. Li Qiang's face turned darker and the bottom of the pot in an instant, and he picked up a broom to drive people away. Uncle Liu came to stop him with a smile on his face. If he can't give birth, does that mean he can't give birth? Li Shadi, why not go next door and find a young and beautiful woman to marry, so that I can see the world? Li Kong was thinking when Uncle Liu was pulled away by Aunt Yu's ear twisting. He was walking and cursing at you, but you know it. Do you want to die with him? I felt uneasy all night because of Aunt Yu's words. A fresh fragrance wafted from the kitchen. We had already had dinner, but my mother-in-law was still busy in the kitchen. I was curious about what soup my mother-in-law was cooking. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, my mother-in-law kicked me out with a shovel. I caught a glimpse of the ingredients in the pot that I couldn't distinguish. So I asked my mother-in-law, "What are you cooking so late at night?" "Don't worry." My mother-in-law gave me a glare and then ordered me to take the clay figurines in the box to the yard to bask in the moonlight. Grandma bowed to the clay figurine placed on the table and lit a red incense that was only used during festivals. She asked me to pull a chair and sit aside to accompany her, hoping to cultivate our relationship. It's really strange. Despite the hot weather, I feel a chill on my back now. I dare not think too much and just looked down at the clay figurine in the box. I carefully looked at the clay figure's eyebrows and eyes, and always felt that these eyes seemed to have some kind of magic. Although they were made of mud, they seemed to be staring at me. A scream came from behind, and the pile of grain that had just been piled up in the evening collapsed. Li Kong walked out of the room, rumbling. What a jerk! Whose black cat was killed by a mouse trap? Grandma also hurried out of the kitchen and laughed when she saw that the dead cat was a black cat. She picked up the dying black cat and killed it with a hammer. This is a good thing. Li Kong and I looked at each other in confusion. Wasn't it said that people in the mountains don't eat cat meat? Li Kong has been working all day and is now too tired to open his eyes. He has gone back to his room to rest, and I am the only one still sitting in the yard. As the night deepened, my mother-in-law finally brought a bowl of soup and left the hospital. She raised her hand to greet me. Kuiken came to drink soup. The good things in the room are always given to Li Kong to eat first. I walked into the room coquettishly. Grandma was unhappy and pulled me to sit on a wooden stool. She gave me a drink. Grandma knocked on my head and said with a smile, "It's for your health. Don't let men ruin this good soup." Grandma still talking incessantly about holding a chubby grandson, having 2 children with 1 child, and the Lee family will have offspring. Only I stared at the black and strange-smelling soup in my hand, lost in thought. Somehow, with a wow, I spat out all the food I had for dinner, and even felt a bit upset. I stuffed the soup bowl back into my mother-in-law's hand. "Mom, I'm really tired from rushing today and can't drink." Grandma's originally smiling face suddenly disappeared. She pinched my chin, forcibly opened my mouth, poured the bowl of soup into my mouth, and drank it all. The soup all poured into my throat. Even though I choked, she still covered my mouth with her hand and forced me to swallow it all. Tears flickered in my eyes, and it took me a while to recover. Grandma looked at the clean bottom of the bowl and was very pleased. Without asking if I was uncomfortable, she let me take the clay figurine back to the room. Grandma said there might be rain tonight, so we can't get the clay figurine very wet before it takes shape. So in the days to come, I started the work of exposing the clay figurines to moonlight and taking them back in the middle of the night. My mother-in-law also let me drink the soup she cooked as usual. The days went on like this for a month, and I felt my body becoming more and more elusive. Lee Kong hugged my body at night and also found something wrong. He kicked me off the bed, his face full of dissatisfaction, like an ice cube. "Do you want to freeze me to death?" I don't know why my body became colder and colder, like soaking in cold water for a long time, and like a corpse that has been separated from my soul for a long time. The floor was so hard that I didn't sleep well all night. When I went to work in the fields the next day, I was listless. Auntie Liu was hoeing nearby and came over to hit my elbow. "Did it hurt?" Auntie Liu looked at me with a smile and said, "I heard that your family has invited a clay figurine fairy." My hoeing action paused, and my mother-in-law reminded me 3 times that I couldn't tell outsiders about the clay figurine. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a good fruit to eat. I remembered the scene of Li Kong raising his hand to hit me and hurriedly shook my head. "Aunt Liu, you really know how to joke. What's going on?" She was still smiling, with indescribable emotions in her eyes, watching me constantly test. I answered decisively, and Aunt Liu finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then she patted my hand and said earnestly, "Chunner, Aunt Liu only told you when you were one of us. You really can't touch this clay figurine." Aunt Liu pretended to be mysterious, looked around a few times, covered her mouth as if she was afraid of being overheard. "You don't know what happened to those people on the neighboring mountain who touched the mud figurine." Aunt Liu was speaking when my mother-in-law rushed over from somewhere and pushed Aunt Liu away from me. Grandma looked nervous, her lips slightly pale, and, upon closer inspection, there was already some sweat on her forehead. My mother-in-law stared at me, then turned to scold Aunt Liu, saying that Aunt Liu was talking nonsense. Then my mother-in-law pulled me back home from the field, ignoring what others were saying. She locked me in the room, and after a long time, she brought me another bowl of soup. All I could think of was what Aunt Liu had just said to me. I resisted and refused to drink this bowl of soup. My mother-in-law was so angry that her eyebrows rose and she had to drink it. I couldn't bear it anymore and loudly questioned my mother-in-law what was in this soup. My mother-in-law didn't answer, but still wanted to pinch my throat and drink it in the same way. I refused and was knocked unconscious by my mother-in-law with a wooden stick. When I woke up, I felt a bitter taste in my mouth, obviously because I had already drunk the medicine. It was already dark outside the window, and I had been dizzy for so long. I held my knocked-on head and wanted to open the room door, but found that the door had been locked. When I turned around, I found that Li Kong was already sleeping in bed, so I quietly climbed onto the bed. My body was cold, and I tried to curl up in the quilt to feel a little warmth. I lay quietly, and the person next to me hugged me into his arms. I looked at Li Kang's face under the moonlight, and my drowsiness disappeared in an instant. "This is not Li Kong. Li Kong is not that young." The man in front of me held my hand. His Quichun still not sleeping. He smiled, but his eyes were as empty as if he couldn't see the bottom. I broke out in a cold sweat and stumbled to the cabinet, fumbling to lift a box. The clay figurine in the box disappeared as expected. So the person in the room is not the real Li Kong, but a clay figurine. In an instant, my breathing became heavy, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. A pair of hands colder than my body rested on my shoulder from behind. "Quichun, my mother said we should have a child as soon as possible." He was extremely strong and tightly hugged my waist. I couldn't escape at all, just kept crying until I ran out of strength. When I woke up again, the sun was already high in the sky, and I couldn't find the figure of the clay figurine by my side. I forced myself to get up and prepare to work in the fields. I felt cold all over and dizzy. I passed out as soon as I reached the door. A bucket of cold water fell from the sky, drenching me completely, and I struggled to open my eyes. Li Kong caught my eye, and last night's fear made me instinctively hide back until I saw the grooves on his face. This is the real Li Kong, not a clay figurine. He also smashed the basin at me, pointing at me, and cursing at you, "You cheap woman. My face is about to be lost by you." Grandma gave Li Kong a signal, and even though Li Kong was unwilling, he still fell silent. Their Li family still needed someone to inherit the family line. Grandma's dark face showed a row of yellow teeth. "Quichun, it's Kyongzi, who doesn't understand. Don't argue with him." Grandma asked me to go back and change into clean clothes, and she was going to make soup for me again. I ran into the kitchen while my mother-in-law was scooping well water, and lifted the small earthen porcelain jar hidden under the stove. Before I could lift the lid, a strong stench made me cry, and the things inside made me scream. My heart seemed to burst out of my throat. There were black cats, mice, bats, and some strange things in the jar that I couldn't explain. I heard my mother-in-law's hurried footsteps outside. Worried that I might be exposed, I gritted my teeth and made a small cut on my wrist. Grandma ran in with a strong momentum, looking nervously at the small clay porcelain jar. After seeing that the clay porcelain jar was covered, she turned to look at me and asked what was wrong. I held my bleeding wrist and frowned. I thought about sharpening the kitchen knife for my mother-in-law, but I didn't expect it to be so sharp. My mother-in-law listened with a relaxed expression and said on the surface that she disliked me for being in the way in the kitchen and kicked me out. She doesn't dislike me. She's just worried that I know what she's using to make soup for me. I knew I couldn't just sit and wait for death. After changing my clothes, I didn't wait for my mother-in-law to cook the so-called spiritual soup. So I went back to my room and rummaged through everything to find the box with the clay figurine, but I couldn't find it anywhere. My mother-in-law stood behind me at some point, holding a bowl of soup and approaching me step by step with a smile. She came out to drink the soup. As soon as I think about how this soup is made with so many disgusting things, I feel nauseous. I force myself to shake my head. "It's too hot, Mom. Even Kyongzi said there's a bubble in my mouth. I'll drink it when it's cool." At this moment, the voice of second aunt came from the door, and my mother-in-law stopped staring at me. "Hurry up, Grandma. Didn't you agree to go to the village to watch the opera troupe sing together?" The second aunt is an extremely impatient person and is now urging and cursing at the door. Grandma just left, and before leaving, she didn't forget to remind me to drink the medicine thoroughly. As soon as my mother-in-law left, I quickly took out the glass bottle under the bed and poured the medicine into it. It's rare for a theater troupe to come to the mountain village. Sometimes it doesn't happen once a year. This time they sang for a longer time. Grandma didn't come back until evening. I hurriedly called my mother-in-law into the house. "What's the matter?" making a fuss. I brought out the fresh meat and flour soup that was placed in the basket. When my mother-in-law saw the meat Her eyes widened and she swallowed her saliva. "Today, Aunt Liu's family bought meat for the first time. I begged for it for a long time. Grandma, you are the hardest working in our family. Drink it quickly." Grandma laughed happily, dressed in embarrassment, but still drank the bowl of soup in big gulps. The smile on my mother-in-law's face disappeared, and in an instant it became solemn. Afraid that I would take a bite. "Why does this fresh meat and flour soup taste so strange?" I patted my mother-in-law's shoulder, raised the soup bowl high, and stared at the bowl of noodles without any residue. Looking back at my mother-in-law, I smiled indifferently and said, "Is it strange? I mixed the soup medicine I drank." Grandma's face turned pale in an instant. Even her mouth froze. She covered her mouth and rushed straight to the yard, scratching her throat like crazy, trying to spit out everything she had just drunk. I squatted down to see my mother-in-law, smiled, and patted her back with concern. "What's wrong? Isn't this the most nourishing thing for your health? I am showing filial piety to you." Grandma pointed at my hand and trembled. "How could you give me this thing to eat?" I blinked my eyes and tried to look innocent. "Isn't this a good thing?" My mother-in-law took a large amount of water to rinse her mouth, but she vomited after rinsing as if she was afraid I would misunderstand. My mother-in-law took a soup to nourish her body, but she refused because her body couldn't take it. She asked me not to give her that medicine again in the future. My mother-in-law took my hand and looked at the position of my room. She was tired after a day and wanted to rest early. Her abnormal behavior made me more suspicious of the clay figurine. I said the hoe is still in the field, and I forgot to take it home. I must go out for a trip. My mother-in-law knew that the more she talked, the easier it was for her to reveal her true colors. For the first time, she didn't care about me and only scolded me as a spendthrift. She wanted to take a shower and go back to her room to rest. I decided to go to the neighboring mountain village again. There is no obvious road on the mountain, so I had to climb the small road with a torch, worried about encountering some man-eating beasts on the way, and walked quickly with fear. I don't know how many hours I groped on the mountain before finding the way down to the village. At this time I was already a little sleepy, but there was a commotion at the foot of the mountain. I hid behind the bushes and watched their movements. Several tall men were in pairs, carrying large sacks, and the rest were holding shovels. I watched them unpack the sack and pour out the body from inside. "This is the third one this month," the creepy man said with regret. "The third one." I held my breath and approached carefully. The man scolded the person behind him to stop talking and be careful not to anger the clay fairy. The man in the brown shirt was speechless. He complained discontentedly, clay fairy every day. Look at how many people have died in our village. This is a monster that sucks people's essence." The man was speaking when he was kicked to the ground the next second. Everyone surrounded him and cursed at him for a long time. I also heard a general idea in this debate. Whether male or female, those who ask for clay figurines will be developed into yin bodies. In the days and nights of being with clay figurines, their young energy gradually decreases until death. By the moonlight, I tried to get closer and saw the two male corpses lying on the ground. Their skin was wrinkled and slightly blue, their eyes were unusually protruding, and their figures were too thin to look good. There was a murky black smell around them. My heart was pounding with fear, and I secretly vowed to stay away from that mud figurine. The sound of rustling came from behind me. I turned around in horror and saw a group of villagers holding torches approaching. It must have been my mother-in-law who noticed that I had escaped. For a moment I couldn't move forward or backward, so I had to run from the side. Unexpectedly, this caught the attention of several men at the foot of the mountain who shouted loudly for someone. The person who came from the village to catch me also heard the noise. In a moment, the intense running sound filled my eardrums, and the torch illuminated my mother-in-law's twisted face. She waved at me. Kuikan went home with her mother don't run away. The wives who were abducted and bought in the mountains of the village. Once someone escapes, the end result is that they are beaten half to death by their in-laws. It is precisely because of this that several abducted girls in our village have died tragically. My mother-in-law has also taken me to see the tragic situation. I know my fate is no different from theirs. My throat became particularly hot because of the violent running. I didn't care too much and plunged into the river, preferring to drown and leave myself a whole body rather than be caught by them. I didn't expect to wake up again and find myself at Li Qiang's house. I thought I was going to die, but my mother-in-law and Li Kong not only didn't scold me, but also treated me surprisingly well. My mother-in-law killed the chicken that she only ate during the Chinese New Year, and for the first time, she added chicken legs for me and let me rest well. This made me suspect that my mother-in-law had gone crazy. Why didn't she force me anymore? It's really strange. In the next 2 days, my mother-in-law was still very good to me. Not only stewed pig trotters for me, but also caught fish in the river and specially fried it for me to eat. Even Li Kong wanted to eat, but his mother-in-law cruelly slapped his hand away. I haven't seen that clay figurine in the past 2 days, and I even thought that my mother-in-law had a conscience and really treated me as a family member. I have lived the most leisurely days since being abducted and brought to the mountains. Li Kong went to help build a house for his newlywed cousin's family and couldn't come back for a month. Grandma also went to work in the fields, and I was the only one sunbathing in the yard, not having to look at my father-in-law's face, which made me feel particularly beautiful. Through the wooden fence, I saw a used child running and playing, as if someone had hit me hard, making me suddenly realize my mother-in-law has been so good to me these days, just to deceive me into staying and having a baby. Sure enough, as soon as night fell, my mother-in-law pushed me back to my room. Grandma smiled sneakily and said, "Go back and rest. It's getting late." As soon as I walked to the door, I saw a clay figure named Li Kong. No, I held on to the wooden door and refused to go inside no matter what I said. My mother-in-law patted my hand with a huge smile on her black and yellow face. She said she didn't want anything. The clay figurine looked exactly like the young Li Kong, with no problem with ABS or biceps. Even my mother-in-law blushed. "This is enjoyment, Quichun." As my mother-in-law spoke, her eyes dripped. Her husband passed away early, and she herself didn't have this good fortune. She didn't expect me to be so reluctant. My mother-in-law flattered me with a smile. "When our Kui-kun has a child, I will enjoy it. Then Kui-kun can also live a prosperous life. Living with mud figurines is only a dead end. Is the so-called life of wealth waiting for me to die and burn paper money for me?" The tragic scene of those male corpses appeared in my mind. My blood ran cold all over my body, so I cruelly pushed my mother-in-law into the room. After watching her fall into the arms of the mud figurine, I hurriedly closed the door, even afraid of making a mistake, and deliberately locked the door. I didn't sleep all night, squatted at the door and listened all night. Everything that happened to me was reproduced in my mother-in-law. The next day, I looked through the window and saw my mother-in-law lying on the messy bed, as if she had only half a breath left. She couldn't die yet. I poured food from the window to ensure that my mother-in-law wouldn't starve to death. I did this on the 2nd, 3rd, and even the following week. The people in the village asked why I didn't see my mother-in-law for the past 2 days, and I said she went to work in the fields and sprained her legs and feet. She has been lying in bed these days. My mother-in-law does have this problem, so no one doubts whether what I say is true or false. On the 8th day after locking my mother-in-law in the room, I released her. My mother-in-law seemed to have suffered great torture, unable to speak clearly, mentally confused, and her lower abdomen was swollen, emitting black gas when pressed. My mother-in-law's death is coming. She knelt down and grabbed my hand. "Kui-kun, I was wrong. I really was wrong. Don't lock me up anymore. I'm afraid." The grandmother, sitting on the ground, trembled and hugged her body tightly, shedding a lot of tears. She knelt on the ground and called out to me one after another, begging me to let go. I squatted down and looked into my mother-in-law's eyes. "You were the one who wanted to kill me first, and you never wanted to leave me a way out. From beginning to end, the greatest pain I have suffered since being abducted into the mountains has come from her." My mother-in-law commanded Li Kong to beat me, threatening that only when a woman beats honestly will she not think of running away. The dark brown scars left by the beating on my body now are all thanks to her. Grandma cried loudly, so I pulled out the earthen porcelain jar, pinched my nose, lifted the lid, and then used chopsticks to pick out a piece of meat with maggots. "You are using this to make soup for me." Grandma looked at the white bug, her lips trembling uncontrollably. She was still begging for mercy, and I had already stuffed the piece of meat into her mouth, like she was holding my mouth and forcing me to drink the soup. "One piece is not enough." I stuffed several pieces into my mother-in-law's mouth until I couldn't cover her mouth anymore. Grandma lay on the floor vomiting nonstop. Her eyes turned red. "Quichun, our lowly family treats you well." "Not bad." I seem to have heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. I have lived in a pigsty, eaten pig food, and was kicked out of my house to look at crops during a thunderstorm. I was almost killed by being kicked to the point of dislocation of my collarbone by Li Kong in that heavy rain. When I first married into the Li family, my father-in-law had not yet passed away. He would still peek at me while I was taking a shower and touch my thighs when no one was around. When will the Li family treat me well? I can survive entirely on my own luck. I didn't argue with my mother-in-law and locked her back in the room. Another week passed, and my mother-in-law's belly bulged, and the news of raising clay figures at home spread to others. I just got up early in the morning, and there were many villagers standing outside the door. I walked out the door to ask why, but they spat at me and accused me of being immoral. She has been ruined by mud figurines and is an ominous thing. Some people in the crowd vaguely shouted that they would immerse me in a pig cage, and soon it spread from mouth to mouth. I looked at their blushing faces and couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Which eye of yours saw me struggling with the clay figurine?" Aunt Yu squeezed through the crowd and walked in front of me. "Only you can't have children." Li Kong was not at home when he went out, but Aunt Liu heard the sound of us parting every night at home. As a result, she insisted that I raise clay figures. Auntie Liu said angrily, and didn't forget to glare at Uncle Liu fiercely, her eyes full of complaints about his inability to work hard at night. I waved to everyone to come with me, and they naturally wanted to see what medicine I was selling in my gourd, and they followed me, half believing. This year's drought has caused poor harvests in the village, and many families can no longer afford to eat. They believe that I am the disaster star and are shouting that they will execute me one by one. I told them not to worry and pushed open the door with my backhand. They saw the belly of the mother-in-law lying on the bed at a glance, and the person at the front was talking loudly about what happened to the mother-in-law. The famous midwife in the village stood at the front. Seeing the situation, she immediately stepped forward and pressed and rubbed her mother-in-law's belly and fell to the ground with a pale face. "Aunt Li, she is pregnant and about to give birth." The midwife's words exploded in the crowd. How could a woman in her 70s still have children? They still didn't want to believe it. The person I just met a while ago now has such a big belly, but the reality is right in front of me. My father-in-law has long passed away, which is well known to everyone. I intentionally guide everyone to think elsewhere. Grandma got up from the bed. Even though she didn't have much strength, she still tried to wave her hand. "Everyone can see it very clearly, right?" I pointed to my mother-in-law, indicating that there is someone else who is struggling with the clay figurine. The villagers were discussing, and the village chief stood up and shouted for two strong young men to carry the grandmother away. This year's crops have almost no harvest due to the drought, and all have been abandoned in the fields. They happen to be the most superstitious and believe that there is a disaster in the village. The village chief's proposal to burn the mother-in-law to death was approved by all the villagers, who have always listened to the village chief. Just didn't expect Li Kong to come back at this time. He looked at the noisy crowd, kicked the table far away, and rushed up to hit me. "What's going on? How do you take care of our mother?" I followed the villagers' words and said that my mother-in-law is a disaster, which has caused our village's harvest to be bad this year. Li Kong fell silent when he heard that he would lose money again this year. He originally wanted to refute something, but in the blink of an eye, he saw something wriggling in his mother-in-law's belly, and black smoke was rising as if it was going to break open her belly. Even the midwife turned pale and was about to run away, shouting disaster. Everyone present was frightened. Even Li Kong couldn't help but take a few steps back, showing fear. Grandma covered her stomach in pain and begged for Li Qiang's name. Li Kong has always been a face-saving person. Seeing this scene, he simply refuses to admit his mother-son relationship with his mother-in-law. The village chief was silent for a moment, then made up his mind to execute the disaster star. The mother-in-law's eyes were full of despair. When the crowd crowded forward to pick her up, she still turned her gaze to her son. I thought Li Kong would say my mother-in-law, but I didn't expect Li Kong to take the initiative to walk up to the village chief and ask how to deal with it. Grandma cried, her tears mixed with black liquid. "Qiangzi, I am your mother. Why are you so cruel?" Li Kong watched, gritted his teeth and shook off his mother-in-law's hand. He said that he couldn't miss the harvest, which was his food. If he couldn't eat enough, he couldn't talk about mother-son relationship. Moreover, she was neither human nor ghost now, and there was really no way. My mother-in-law wanted me to save her life again. She admitted that she just wanted me to stay in the Li family and never intended to take my life. I am young and strong, and I will definitely not be tortured to death. My mother-in-law scolded me for being cruel. Aunt Yu stood up to defend me. Only then did I realize that everyone in the village knew that long-term indulgence with clay figures was a dead end. My mother-in-law had this idea and never wanted me to live. The sky is getting dark, and I'm worried that the heavy rain is about to stop, urging that it seems like it's going to rain. Everyone immediately understood and carried the mother-in-law out. I silently followed behind and watched them carry the mother-in-law up the mountain. The blazing flames and rising black smoke blinded my eyes, and my mother-in-law finally reaped the consequences. The scene was too stimulating, and I smelled the pungent smell. My feet felt weak, and I didn't feel fortunate to have survived the disaster. The clay figurine is still there. If I don't get rid of it, I will still be watched. The first thing I do when I return to the room is to find the clay figurine box. My mother-in-law once told me before she passed away that the clay figure immortal cannot encounter water. The clouds on the horizon were pressed down, and soon there was a violent storm and thunder. The rain was particularly heavy, and I also found the clay box. I threw the box into the rain, and the mud figurine seemed to have a natural barrier, and even the rain could not soak it in half. In the pouring rain, only the clay box remained dry. Someone hurriedly walked over in the rain. It was Aunt Yu. She shouted at me. Li Kong was struck to death by lightning while watching the burning, and asked me if I wanted to go clean up his funeral. In an instant I felt relieved. The two people I hated the most in this mountain village left this world in one day. I laughed loudly. Even Aunt Yu thought I was crazy and hurriedly ran away with an umbrella. A bright blue lightning flashed across the sky. My eyes lit up, and then a loud bang exploded in my ears. When I covered my eyes and opened them again, there was a black hole on the ground in the yard. and the clay box was also charred black by lightning, emitting billowing black smoke. Looking at this scene, it took me a long time to realize that the clay figurine no longer existed. After standing for a long time, I returned to the room to search for things. Li Kong had been holding the money at home. I searched for a long time before finding the money under the box, and then went back to my mother-in-law's room to find my silver bracelet. When I was young, I always envied other girls who had a small silver bracelet, but my parents always favored my younger brother and thought that girls didn't need these things. They scolded me, humiliated me in every way, and cut off my living expenses. The silver bracelet was the first gift I gave myself after becoming independent. My mother-in-law put my bracelet in the gray jewelry box, and now it has returned to my hand. I looked at my little silver bracelet and decided to leave the mountains and return to the city where I used to live. I have suffered so much for others. It's time for me to live well for myself.